Great, thank you. So thank you all for coming today. Today's RAC meeting will go from 11 a.m. to 12:30 a.m. And we are here as the second RAC in the Best Practices in Community Engagement Around Water Projects, or Division 601. Just as some very brief and overview of our virtual meeting protocol. So today's meeting is virtual only. We have a mixture of RAC members, members of the public, and also agency partners that are here to observe the process. So RAC members, that we do ask that you stay on mute when you're not talking. Please turn on your video if you are willing and if it's possible. Use your raise your hand feature to speak if you have the capabilities. That would most often be under your emotions in whatever Zoom version that you happen to be using. And then also, if at all possible, please limit the use of the chat feature. We'd like to try to keep all of our conversations within the verbal rack room so that it's a little bit easier for all of us to track. Also, members of the public, if you have the ability, please stay off or on mute and off camera until the public comment period. If you are interested in providing public comment for today's RAC, we do actually ask you to use the chat feature and just kind of drop a chat in today's Zoom and just give us a heads up that you're interested in doing that. That way we can make sure that we keep track of the order of any public comments and that we ensure that there's ample time for public comments at the end. So as I mentioned, today's meeting will go from 11 to 12:30. Very excited that we have a pretty full RAC meeting today, and we will be going through these sections by section. We'll be providing a quick overview of our RAC feedback from the September 16th meeting, reflections on that, an overview of the draft economic and fiscal impact statement and the racial equity statement, and then having the bulk of today's meeting really focusing on those two sections of the document and really focusing on economic and fiscal impacts and racial equity. And then at the end, we'll have a public comment period. So at this time, I'm going to go through just the roles of the RAC members and roles of WRD staff, and then I would love to have a brief introductions of all of our RAC members to ensure that everyone is on for today and that your video and your mics are working. So the role of the RAC is really to help us to go through the draft rules and specifically the fiscal and the racial impacts. We provided you a very large package of materials prior to this meeting. So if at any time you are needing a document or you're looking for a document, Kim will help kind of orient you to our website where you can download those and make sure that you can follow along with us. Also, WRD staff are here to help facilitate the meeting, obviously provide technical support and subject matter expert, and really to help walk us through the draft rules. So at this time, I am going to ask that if all of our RAC members would be willing and able to turn on your cameras, I'm going to ask each of you one at a time to introduce yourselves. And let's go in the order that I can see you. So let's go Kimberly first, please.
Hi, everyone. Kimberly Priestley, Water Watch of Oregon.
Peggy. Oh, I'm not sure if Peggy, if you're having some issues with your microphone.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
I was gonna say you broke up a little bit, Charlotte. So yeah.
Oh, sorry about that. Peggy, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure, Peggy Lynch, League of Women Voters of Oregon, Natural Resources Coordinator.
Great. Sorry about that. I'm in the office, but it's always questionable internet. Christopher.
Oh, good morning, everybody. Christopher Hall with Water League.
Okay. Let's check is Adam.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Adam Demminger with Seal Rock Water District.
April.
Good morning, everybody. April Snell with the Oregon Water Resources Congress.
And let's go to Harmony.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Harmony Burright, and I am here as myself today. Nice to see you all.
Michael?
Good morning, everyone. Michael Martin, League of Oregon Cities.
Great. And I'm going to just confirm. Is Commissioner, is Commissioner Beveridge on today?
Yes, this is Commissioner Beveridge. I just don't have video.
No worries.
Okay, Commissioner Beveridge, Donna, Upper Grand Ron, Place-Based Planning Convener and Union County Commissioner.
Great. And do we have Cheyenne on today? Or another representative from Verde?
Yep.
There you are.
Cheyenne Holiday, she, her, and I'm going to apologize. I have a snoring dog in the background today, and it's very loud.
No worries whatsoever. Excellent. So it looks like we have a full RAC roster on for today. We also look like we have many members of the public also joining us today. So thank you for coming and joining today's meeting. I also ask that we do have many members of different state agencies that have been part of this process. So if you are interested in their affiliations, please go through and just add on your affiliation to your name, specifically for state agencies. And they are listed on our RAC roster. So with that, thank you guys. So we're going to keep rolling into our meeting today. So the first thing that we're going to actually do is do an overview of what we covered at our last RAC meeting and specifically go through a track change version of the rules as they are in draft form currently and talk through those specific changes and those specific feedback that we received. So I will be toggling between the PowerPoint and also a PDF. This PDF, it has been provided to all the RAC members. And once again, if members of the public or others do not have a copy of that, we'll be able to drop that right into the chat so that you can follow along as well. So just as an overview, we are going to be going through Division 601. This is a brand new division for WRD, and this is really focusing on implementing the best practices around community engagement for water projects. So what we will be doing is kind of going through all of these sections as you can see them outlined on the screen here, and mainly highlighting changes that have been made at RAC member requests and also just for clarifying purposes of the rules. Ideally, I'm hoping to kind of go through all of the changes that have been made to the draft rules throughout the document and then pausing to have a group conversation. So if you have the ability, please hold your questions until the end, just so that we are able to get through all of the different nuanced changes and then have a conversation. So give me 1 second. I'm going to attempt to stop sharing my screen. So I'm just going to do a technology check. Are you able to see my screen being shared right now?
Can
Yes,
you
it's
expand it?
really tiny.
It is very tiny. Okay. Is that any better? Okay, I'm seeing some thumbs, so thank you for that. And we are going to move over. Okay. So I'll be going section through section, as I said, just to orient yourself to this document. So these are the draft rules as they currently exist for Division 601. This is a brand new division for the agency. And we will be going through and looking at both the track changes and also the original text from the past draft. The original text that you can see will be presented in black, and then also the new additions to these rules are going to be shown in red, underlined as an addition, and red struck through is going to be a deletion from the rules. So just as an orientation for this, basically what we did throughout the document was there has been a new emphasis to make sure that the rules emphasize both inviting and supporting meaningful involvement. This was something that was really stressed in our last RAC meeting and through RAC comments. So you'll see several different places in which that has been addressed. There also has been just a structural change in the way that we've been describing development, implementation, and development and implementation to saying both. So it is not that basically we have changed the meaning, we have tried just to condense the words, and those are the most substantial changes that have made to the purpose. So for the definitions, we have received, and I'm going to apologize for anyone that gets motion sick. So I'm going to try to pause the screen as we get to certain spots. We have made some changes to the definitions that are provided within this document. So this is section 2. The substantial changes that have been made were to the meaning and clarification of meaningful involvement. We did want to make sure that we broaden this out to include environment, economy, and health, so a wide range of different impacts on communities. We also did receive feedback from the RAC in several different places that they would like to see reference to local governments and local organizations as per the statute, ORS 541-551. So that change has been made. It does not change the extent or necessarily applicability of who can apply, but it does make it clearer and have a more direct tie to our originating statute. So the next changes that we did make to the definitions were specifically for providing more clarity around water projects, so not just referencing the original ORS. In addition to best practices, we did clearly define and provide that definition. In addition, we did provide the definitions of local government and local organization per ORS 541-551. The goal of providing these additional information is to have it more tightly tied to the original statute and be a little easier for people to read within the actual document and track all of the definitions in one place. So the next section, so this is funding for community engagement plans, or section 3. We did make some substantial changes to this section per RAC feedback. And particularly, we did add in, once again, some more information about inviting and supporting meaningful engagement and making sure that it was clear that it was for the identification, planning, and development or implementation of water projects. Another change that was made to this section in particular was additional clarification per the original statute. So we did add in a new section here. You can see this in red. This is section 3. And really this is meant to make sure that it's very clear of what the purpose of these funds are related to. And then also for clarity on where it can be spent. There also was some additional clarification about ineligible and eligible reimbursable costs and making sure that it was very clear the wide range of eligible costs in order to ensure that community engagement was supported the best that we could.
Charlotte?
Yep.
Christopher has had his hand up and I think wanted to comment on an earlier part of the thing. Do you want us to have comments now?
I would prefer that if we have the ability to hold them till the end. If it's an issue that I'm scrolling through the screen too fast, please by all means say, because that's a process based. But if it's conversation about the rules, I would like us to hold that to the end, please. But thank you for that. I apologize. My screen is split, so I cannot see you very well off to the side. And Christopher, you're comfortable with that? Just to ensure that I do acknowledge that you had a question.
Oh, sure, thanks.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So moving on to section 4, I do want to highlight that section 4 has changed slightly, but the biggest change that we did have was I do want to highlight the change to best practice A. We did have a very robust and very meaningful conversation about this best practice. And this best practice has changed to say identifying and inviting disproportionately impacted communities interested in engaging in the water project. We feel that this change is really in line with what the meaning and the purpose of the statute is. And you can see not only this inviting concept being incorporated here, but thoughtfully incorporated the best that we can throughout the document to make sure that we support all aspects of meaningful engagement. So the next thing I do want to highlight in this section, so this is section 4, is that there has been some substantial changes to kind of providing more structure on what our community engagement plans and some of the guidelines for what we are hoping to have involved in them. So you can see here that section A is changed pretty substantially. This new text is very much in line with what has been stated in the actual statute, but also the goal is to really help provide a better framework for what we're expecting within the community engagement plans so that there is transparency and clarity on what we hope to see in them and what communities are really hoping to see out of them. So this is really to help provide some more accountability within it. Specifically a description of disproportionately impacted communities using established systems, that framework with clear goals for participation, realistic, achievable outcomes, and also having a set metrics and timelines to evaluate progress and success in the community engagement plan. So you will notice, just so that I am clear, there has been some sections that were struck. They were reincorporated above. We did not lose any substance to these. We really were focusing on adding more clarity. So section 5, just to briefly go through, there has been some small changes to this section, mainly just for clarity. There also was a combination of section 2 and 3, really to make it more process oriented, although all of the key steps are still there. We also did add in some additional content that this section specifically focusing on evaluation and how are we planning on evaluating and measuring success of not only the community engagement application, but also the community engagement plan as a whole. So you will see that there is new text here per recommendations of many of the RAC members on how we plan to evaluate community engagement plan applications. This is in accordance, obviously, with 600 and 693, but also making sure that we tie back throughout the actual OIR 601 itself so that we are asking people to go through all of those pieces of the community engagement plan and also incorporate that as evaluation. There also was the new section 4, which I want to make sure is highlighted and brought to everyone's attention, where the department may also have the ability to evaluate applications on additional criteria, including the significance and impact of the proposed water project or the community engagement plan on local communities and disproportionately impacted communities, the appropriateness of the budget and resources involved, and most importantly, also the expertise, qualifications, and level of community connections held by those individuals within the community engagement plan. So the last section, and then we will open it up for some comments. Thank you for walking through this with me. It's a little bit clunky in this format. Is the section 6, which is funding agreements and reporting. We added in quite a bit more clarity on what is expected for reporting so that it's very clear on what should go into these different processes, specifically tying back to those metrics and timelines, and then also having people acknowledge different framework goals, timelines, and evaluation metrics. We also want to make sure that in the reporting process, there is that feedback loop where communities are being heard, incorporated into the process, and that the applicants for these processes are actually working that into the community engagement plan or having a framework for how it would be worked into the water project itself. And then also there was some additional text added in here just as our ability as the department to make sure that we can help the community engagement plan applicants with the evaluation add additional criteria onto that application if it is funded, and then also just a standard text for what would happen if the community engagement plan is in violation of any of the processes here. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and open up conversation. So I do want to just very briefly acknowledge the time. We are a little bit behind on time, but we are still going to provide about 20 minutes or so, depending on the conversation and how it's going for this section, just so that we can talk through the rules and talk through the processes. I do want to just make sure that we do have some kind of standard level setting points about these rules before we kind of open it up for questions. And I'd love to start with Christopher at that time. I do want to make sure that it is clear that the community engagement funding will be a separate application to the main water project's funding streams. So that does not mean that someone applying for a community engagement plan funding necessarily has to already have funding for the water project itself. So it should be complementary, but you do not need to have that funding prior. However, the water project that the community engagement plan is focused around needs to be eligible for those different funding streams. So if there's questions about that, I'm happy to make sure that we're clear, but just to be very straightforward, the water project has to be eligible for other funding. It does not have to already have received that funding. In many situations, this kind of pre-planning community engagement should and can come first. Also, the water project developers do not need to be the primary applicant of the community engagement plan funding, but they do obviously need to be involved in that community engagement plan. So what do I mean by that? If there is other partner organizations that are wanting to do a community engagement plan, they can partner with whoever is doing that specific water project, but that actual water project developer does not necessarily need to be the primary applicant. They should and could and need to be part of that application and that process so that during the community engagement plan and that during the interactions with communities, that feedback is actively incorporated and meaningfully impacting that water project. So there needs to be a relationship, but the actual water project applicant does not have to be the person doing the water project currently or in the future, but there needs to be a clear partnership. Also, just a comment about eligibility of applicants. Both 690.693 and 690.600 have a huge range of different applicants that can apply for funding. So there is a really wide range of different applicants that can apply for this type of funding. But they do obviously need to be directly related to and kind of part of the planning for the water project. Example for this is that Soil and Water Conservation District could be applying for a community engagement plan, or a partnering NGO could be applying for a community engagement plan funding with the Soil and Conservation District. So that could be a partnership. If in many situations, if the Soil and Water Conservation District is interested in doing community engagement planning or is doing a water project, and they don't have the time or expertise to do community engagement planning, they can always subcontract out to another group. So this process is not necessarily excluding community engagement or communications experts being brought onto the project. They would be considered a non-eligible primary applicant, but are always encouraged to be brought in as contractors. Just to be very, very clear, and that type of relationship is often used within these type of granting programs already. And kind of the last thing, just to make sure that we're clear as a group, is that Division 601, which is the community engagement planning around water projects, is really focused on a specific water project and around kind of community engagement and increasing meaningful involvement of communities in a specific water project. This is different and distinct from other programs that WRD and our partnering agencies run, such as place-based planning, which is really focused on community-led planning, larger scale solutions, wider suites of projects. So these are different funding streams and different processes. So what we're talking about today really is focused per statute on a water project itself. So therefore, the different relationships we set up in the division rules and then also through our conversations are focused on that partnership around a core water project. So with that, I would love to kind of start with Chris, if you have some kind of clarifying thoughts or comments on the rules. Ideally, we'd like to focus on the rules as they're written and making sure that we help to make them as clear and refined as possible.
Well, first, thank you for that description. I generally don't find myself the kind of person who gets, confused. And I think that your effort to try to clarify that through oral written comments has led to more ambiguity, at least for me. So I would really benefit from seeing that written down. So in a clear statement as to specifically what was being construed, because I think it's very clear from section 2, subsections 4 and 10, where they discuss eligibility requirements. And let's see here. Section 2, number 4, community engagement plan applicant means eligible local governments or local organizations that apply to receive grants or loans from OAR 600 and 093 for water project community engagement plan. And the other one, number 10, similarly, who operates in an area affected by a water project and is eligible to receive those grants from 600 and 093. I'll note that the local organization definition under number 10 in rule adds that last phrase, starting with the word who. And I can't, in the short time we have, reiterate 7 pages of comments that I sent in recently that I appreciate you sharing around. I'll incorporate those comments by reference here as part of this conversation right now. But I think for the purposes for which I was thinking, it'd be great just to strike out of the rule in section 4 and 10 of section 2, subsections 4 and 10. Just strike those eligibility requirements or refine them in a way that allows a community to represent itself without having the actual water project developer oversee that, because I just can't get above or beyond the conflict of interest. That's really just my main comment in this section. Thank you so much for the chance to share that.
Great. Thank you for that. And yes, I do want to make sure that everyone is aware. Mr. Hall did provide comments. Those were part of the packet that we all did get as part of this meeting. Are there any other, and I would love to open up comments on the entire rule. So are there any other comments or thoughts that you would like to provide? Cheyenne, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I have a clarifying question, just to make sure I'm understanding. And Charlotte, I think you said it, but I'm not quite sure if I heard it right. So the the projects or the entities that apply for this community engagement fund, those projects have to be eligible for a water project, but do they have to apply for that water project first before they can apply, or like what's that process?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. No, they do not. They need to be eligible to have applied, but the eligibility is extremely broad. Basically, many organizations can apply. So that eligibility framework is very narrow. They do not have to have applied for funding already. And I do
Okay.
see Kim's hands up, so she is our resident expert on these grant programs, so maybe she can provide some more clarity on that.
Yeah, I wonder if some examples would be helpful because sometimes it's hard in theory and concept when you're talking about multiple funding opportunities to like see how does this play out on the ground. So the two programs that are referenced in Rule Division 93 is our Water Supply Development Account, which governs our competitive water project grants and loans funding opportunity, which are funds to plan, develop, and implement water projects that meet in-stream or out-of-stream water needs and produce public benefits in three categories: environmental, economic, and social cultural public benefits. Division 600 is the account, I believe, is called the Water Conservation Reuse and Storage Program Fund, and we commonly refer to it as feasibility study grants because those are funds to investigate the feasibility of water conservation, reuse, and storage. And we kind of envision them as a bit of a trajectory of support. Often in a collaborative planning process, you'll identify a suite of strategies that you might want to pursue. So that would be in place-based planning. You're like, okay, there's a suite of strategies. We're interested in, say, storage. Folks can come to feasibility study grants and would be eligible under these rules. Sometimes folks do an initial survey to identify potential storage sites. And so what could be done within that is there could be a proposal to either develop a community engagement plan or do community engagement in that early site identification process. In the past, we have had both those who would implement a storage project pursue funding, as well as nonprofits who are working with partners in the basin. But we want to know that it's leading to a potential project, and so it can't just be sort of a research academic exercise. We've had folks include community engagement work in their feasibility study grants in the past. We funded it in the past, and I see these rules as making those clear criteria so that we can make sure that we're funding good community engagement plans and work along with that. So that's feasibility study grants, how it could play out. And then on the flip side, for water project grants and loans, it is in that implementation phase. And so folks could either, as Charlotte noted, it could be the water project developer or them with a partner. Once again, develop a community engagement plan or implement a community engagement plan through the implementation of the water project, because as is noted in our best practices, ideally there's community engagement all along the spectrum, right? From identifying the project all the way through implementation and monitoring after. And it's just that we have different funding opportunities for those different phases of projects. So I hope that was helpful in clarifying how we see this playing out in the programs through these rules.
Great, thank you, Kim. Harmony, I see your hand is up. Oh, and I think you're on mute.
Yep. Hi, everyone. I was unable to attend the first meeting, so my apologies if I'm like covering ground that's already been covered. I do think this set of the statute and the rules are like just really tough to understand exactly how this is going to play out, like how actually this works. And I recall, yeah, in my department days commenting on the statute that in my work in public participation, one of the critical, like the most critical junctures for community engagement is really like analyzing alternatives and project identification. That if we get to a point where someone is kind of determined that they want to do a project and they're just then engaging community, oftentimes they won't be open to looking at alternatives. And I can't quite tell with all of this the extent to which this opportunity kind of facilitates that engagement at that really critical juncture before someone who is proceeding with development of a project is going to be in a position to just want to pursue their project regardless to some extent of the outcomes. And I just can't quite see whether and how that's addressed here.
So that is an excellent question, and I might start and then lean on to our grant expert for this. I think it depends on which of the programs the community engagement plan is kind of focusing on applying for funds. And then it depends on kind of, for lack of a better phrase, project with a big P or project with a little p. As Kim was kind of describing, if there is interest in doing storage projects, that is, but you don't know where it is or to what extent and things like that, I think a community engagement plan request around something that is like we want to find a site to do a water storage project would still be applicable here. That is still a critical juncture in planning, but still something that's focused and finite versus a project that might be a little bit more fully formed, like an irrigation ditch exactly here in this spot through this path. So I think that there is going to be a spectrum to ensure that community engagement planning is occurring at those critical junctures. I see your hand go right back up, so I'm hoping I did answer and didn't add some more confusion to that.
No, you did answer, and I think it just it kind of furthers my concern. I guess what I've seen in the feasibility study grants and the water project grants and loans is that by the time people are applying for those programs, they know that they want to do, the example is a storage project, pro, con, whatever. If that's been identified, right, what was the step to identify whether or not storage was necessary or whether or not water demands could be met through other means, and allowing for public participation to identify the necessity of that project versus now you're committed to a project and you're just seeking input on how to do the project, not whether to do the project. And I think that that's just a really critical for especially impacted communities. Historically, when someone wants to develop something, they'll check the box on engagement, but they won't be open to reconsidering whether or not to do the project. And I just feel like that has the potential to perpetuate, kind of perfunctory community engagement. And I don't know how to address it because it might just be, an issue with the statute, but it is just my overriding interest and concern with this set of rules generally. I don't really know how to address it, but I did want to vocalize it.
Thank you for that. And Kim, I don't know if you want to respond to that, and then I want to make sure we leave space for some others to comment as well.
Yeah, I will just note that feasibility study grants can be to investigate how or whether a project should be pursued. Specifically with storage projects, there is a requirement that there is a comparison and analysis to see if water can be met through some alternative needs. We call those the storage specific study requirements. It's only required for storage projects. That's not required for conservation or reuse to look at that alternatives. And then I will also note what these rules do is when somebody proposes that they want to do community engagement for their project, we will have the space to ask them for information on like what they're proposing to do and can do that check as to whether is it really engagement where there's meaningful involvement, or is it a campaign for a project or something else. These rules give us that ability at the application and then later stage to say, you're not following the best practices and you shouldn't receive funding for community engagement that won't result in actual meaningful involvement of these communities. That said, and I want to just be really clear, we are not requiring community engagement for applicants. They would self-select into that process. So when they say, hey, we want to do a community engagement plan for our project, say, okay, if you want to, these are the standards that you need to follow. So just share both of those pieces of how we're trying to implement what I agree is a nuanced and complex statute written to apply across 6 agencies with very different funding opportunities.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. That did help. And I was going to say something else, but that helped. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do see a comment in the chat from Mr. Hall. I do want to just clarify that. So there was a question of, can you help me understand the meaning of section 2, number 4, community engagement plan applicant. So the rules are, as they're written for Division 601, are a little bit nuanced in that they clearly define community engagement plan grantee and community engagement plan applicant separately. The eligibility for those obviously are the same, but we do want to make a nuance with a grantee is a person that is applying for the funds, and we reference them in the sections we talk about application requirements, where I just switched that. I apologize. So a community engagement plan grantee is someone who has received funds, and we want to make sure we reference those in reporting requirements. A community engagement plan applicant is someone that is actively applying for the funds. So they are referenced within sections that are talking about application requirements. I'm hoping I just didn't make that more confusing. I'm happy to provide some more context. And I see a lot of hands. So Kim, I'd like to go to you, and then Harmony, before we go to you, I want to provide some space for everyone else so that we can ensure that all voices are heard.
Yeah.
And then oh, go ahead, Kim.
I was going to say what I think I might hear Christopher asking is why we are specifically calling out local governments or local organizations in this. Right. I often think of it as there's a Venn diagram. There are the broad set of folks who can apply for feasibility study grants and water project grants and loans. Includes persons, and Oregon's definition of persons is very broad. But then what, I'm going to forget the ORS reference, but House Bill 3293 gave us the authority to do is to require these best practices for local governments and local organizations. And so that's why they're the entities called out in rule. So I think that's the specific text there. The limitation might need you to clarify that, Chris.
Is it okay if I just jump in real quick then? Okay.
Yes, please do.
Yeah, so, section 4, the full section talks about community engagement plan applicant means eligible local governments or local organizations. And the point or the question that I have is very specific, which wasn't actually referred to or discussed, is the limitation that one must apply to receive grants or loans from either Division 600 or Division 93 for a water project community plan engagement plan. So I guess my question is that what is meant with regard to that apply to receive grants or loans from Division 600 or 93? Does that mean that anybody who is applying for a community engagement plan must also be an applicant under 600 or 093 for a water project? Does that mean that anybody who applies for a community engagement plan must actually be a water project developer?
No. So
Can you help me clarify that, because it's not clear to me specifically who can, or rather who can't apply, and what the limitations actually mean in a very plain language. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I'm seeing several hands. So I'm going to answer that question, and then I want to go to Peggy, Adam, and then Harmony, and then just do a time check on making sure that we are thoughtful for holding time for the economic and fiscal impact statement. So I am flagging that maybe the definition and the wording of that can be kind of altered a little bit more to have more clarity for there. But for someone that is applying for a community engagement plan, you would apply through those two different programs. So those two programs are going to have a new application process within the nest that it already exists for community engagement plans. It does not mean that you have to have already applied for a water project through one of those programs. It's just when you apply for a community engagement plan associated with a water project in whatever stage that it is, you would be applying to that program. So, but I do hear a lot of question and hesitation in the way and the phrasing of that definition. So I do want to make sure that we maybe revisit it and make sure that clarity is added to that. But it is not the intent that you would have already had to have applied as a water project developer or otherwise to those programs in order to receive a community engagement plan funding stream. With that, I do want to go to Peggy. Let's go to you first. And then I see a whole string of other hands.
Really quickly. So so what I thought I heard was that the projects, the two project grant programs don't have to have a community engagement plan in order to apply for those two grant programs. And Kim is shaking her head yes. So will they receive fewer points if they haven't done a community engagement plan first? I just want to make sure that if we're going to give them grants to do actual things, that they actually do engage people first.
So the funding for the community engagement plans is going to be a separate application for those water projects. Water projects are not going to be required to do community engagement planning. Kim is
So
going to
you keep-
jump in.
You keep saying separate application. It's like within one
Within the
application,
program.
you will like an appendix. It's not,
Yeah.
we're not creating there's not a new community engagement plan funding opportunity. We are using existing funding opportunities that we have authority for.
Okay.
So let me follow up really quickly. I thought it was way quicker than it is. So I want to do a feasibility study, but I don't have to apply for this set of grants to engage people on that feasibility study. Or I want to apply for a project. I don't have to apply for this set of monies to do in community engagement. So how's the community engagement going to happen in those two grant cases, if not this way?
Community engagement is not a formal requirement of any of our funding opportunities. It is something already built into the scoring. Like you already in water project grants and loans, there are the social cultural benefits where collaborative planning is a set of points that you get, and there's a bonus set of points that you can get. Similarly, community benefit, I don't think it's community benefit, it might be community need or value in feasibility study grants, where like those projects that are including that do score higher are more likely to receive funding, but those are not requirements of those statutory established programs. And this statute does not give us the authority to require that those programs change to include. We are incentivizing rather than requiring community.
Thank you. That answers the question, Kim.
Perfect. Let's go to Adam and then Kimberly, and then we will close out with Harmony if I don't see
Okay.
any other questions pop up.
Great, Charlotte, thank you. The last conversation answered one of my questions, so thank you, Kim, for providing that clarification. The other question I have is really just mostly a comment as I think of small rural community water systems and their expertise or capacity even with community engagement. And I'm sure it's embedded in the process. Kim, you may have alluded to it, but will there be technical support for those communities that want to apply for this funding? Is that available to them? Is the department going to be able to support them through this effort if there's a willingness on the part of the applicant to pursue community engagement? And should we be identifying that at this point, or do we just assume that it's embedded in the 600 in the 093 for qualification?
Yeah, I see that as embedded in like the program materials and guidance. Our goal like is to provide those resources or to connect folks with partners. I know we've talked with a number of folks where they're like, yeah, this isn't our bailiwick, this isn't our thing, and we would love to know who could help us do this well. But I don't think we need rules to make those connections. That would be something we do in the program development to identify, hey, is there a list of folks that we know do this work well that folks could subcontract out to or connect with to collaborate and, apply for a grant together.
Yeah, and I assume that, but I just didn't want to walk away from the conversation without hearing it. So thank you so much, Kim.
Okay, and Kimberly.
Yeah, I appreciate the conversation today. I think it's really thoughtful and helpful. I did want to say that I do agree with some of what, some of Harmony's concerns, and just wanted to remind folks that it's somewhat similar to the point that Chris raised last meeting that some of us agreed with about making sure that we protect against like savvy consultants using this process to manufacture consent. And I do think, I definitely appreciate that you added I think it's section 5, 3, and 4, where the department now you clearly state that how they will evaluate the community engagement applications. And again, appreciate that you put that in there, but I think what's still missing is like clear authority or clear language that says, if this doesn't meet this, we will say no, or we will say yes. So in other words, like if we are really trying to protect against that and, elevate meaningful community engagement, I think it would help the department to have clear language saying, if it doesn't meet this, we will deny. If it meets this, we may approve. But then, that also raises questions, which I think I raised in my written comments about, say you have X amount of money and you have X plus 20 applicants coming in. And like, how, I guess, sorry, I'm not being very clear. I guess the big question is like, how are you going to make decisions? It might be helpful to have that in better fleshed out in the rules.
Thank you for that. And yes, we definitely can take that into consideration. We also are in the process of making sure there's additional guidance documents to help make that a little bit clearer and provide a little bit more of that information as well. Let's go to Harmony and have you kind of wrap out our conversation on the rules. And then I do want to give some time for the economic impact statement as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate the thoughtful comments today. And I kind of in the vein of this, I do see the department's kind of feedback as one avenue or one venue in terms of the grant application. I just very much support the department's making an honest appraisal and providing feedback regarding whether or not this will achieve the desired outcomes. And find myself drawn to Kimberly's comment and kind of providing some clarity around that, as well as support for what Chris is describing here, allowing for communities themselves to engage on a project if they've not been engaged. And I do think the statute is broad enough that it could allow that. I do think that's probably at the discretion of the department, but I do see that it's broad enough that it could allow that and would encourage you to think about what that could look like. But similarly, on the opposite side, I would caution against community groups using this as a venue to manufacture opposition, right? So like this whole community participation, public participation, you have to consider both of these sides and how people might kind of not be acting in good faith on either level. And that's just a really tough thing to guard against. I do want to state overall, though, I do believe that this opportunity is great in terms of like more public participation. I'm generally just like, yay. And so I'm glad this exists, but I can see all of the many complications in actually getting the money out on the ground and then what impact it will have. And I'm eager to see how this all plays out.
Great. With that, I think I see no other hands and no lingering questions in the chat. So I am going to pivot us. Thank you all for these comments. I'm going to pivot us onto the economic impact statement. So hopefully you guys do have a copy of the economic and the racial impact statements. If you need a copy of that, please feel free to put something in the chat and Kim can help orient you to that. I'm going to share my screen, hopefully. And pivot our conversation. So the second half of today's conversation is that I do want to spend some time on the draft economic and racial impact statements. This is meant to be just as a draft, and we are encouraged and welcoming, obviously, many comments and additional feedback on these sections of the statements. And just to be clear that the statement of fiscal impacts requirements and purpose is really for us to identify how state agencies, units of local government, and the public may be economically impacted by the rules, kind of if and how possible estimate economic impacts for those agencies, use available information in our understanding and drafting of what these impacts could be, and really also ensure that your input as RAC are actively considered and incorporated as we can into this process. So our economic impact statement, these are just some snippets from our statement as it's written. We're not necessarily expecting any significant economic impact on the department itself, past our ongoing review of applications of these different community engagement plans. There also may be possibly a positive economic impact for Oregon communities themselves, as community engagement plans do allow for funds to be utilized to help compensate disproportionately impacted communities in their participation in community engagement planning. Also, our racial equity statement considerations. This division as a whole really is aimed at increasing meaningful involvement of disproportionately impacted communities in development and implementation of community engagement plans for water. In addition, the best practices as they're written really does provide specific provisions to encourage engagement throughout different disproportionately impacted communities. There is also one when we consider our tribal partners, really highlighting that not only the statute, but also the rule as it stands has them eligible as applicants, but also as partners. And we really want to highlight that some of the best practices really have been aimed at being as inclusive as we can to our federally recognized tribal partners. But as this department currently has the draft statement written, we do not anticipate any adverse consequences from a racial equity lens for this rule. So I'm going to go through two sets of questions, and I'd love to just open it up to some conversations. So we would love to have some feedback on the draft statements as they're written. Specifically, we would love to see if there is any sort of expected impacts by your organization or those you think that might be doing community engagement planning. We do anticipate there could be additional reporting, record keeping, or administrative costs. But as the statement says, we are anticipating that could be helped supported through the funding itself. And then do you see that there'd be any additional cost professionally, equipment-wise or otherwise? And once again, highlighting that it is our intent that the rule helps support any of those additional costs by allowing them to be eligible expenses. Also, racial equity kind of considerations. Who do you think could be impacted by the rules, and how could the draft rules affect racial equity? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I would love to kind of invite Kim, if you're able to pop those questions into the chat, if you think that they would help guide the conversation. But I would love to start with the economic impact statement and see if anyone has any thoughts on fiscal impact statement as it's written, and if there is any sort of places in which we need to continue to consider possible impacts, either positive or negative. And I am seeing a comment from Harmony. In the chat, it says, one more flag, the statute includes planning and technical assistance as eligible support that could be provided, and that I would encourage the inclusion of this language regarding the might look like and whether department plans to focus on providing financial support. And now I see a few hands. So hoping to focus the conversation on the economic and the economic statement. And I don't know what order you came up. So let's start with Christopher, and I might just go across my screen with that.
Yeah, I'll just be real brief. Let's see, on page 2 of the handout of the statement of racial equity impacts and economic and fiscal impacts. So are we talking about that whole document right now? And if so, it's just at the very bottom of page 2. It says no unintended adverse consequences on racial equity are expected from the rule. And if my previous concerns about water project developers having any involvement in community engagement around their projects, I think there's a chance that they could, through a conflict of interest, abridge or preempt the equity concerns and the consequences on racial equity that may come from the rule. That's just a general comment. Thanks.
Great. Thank you for that. And that has been noted. Let's go to Peggy, please.
So just really quickly, it's my understanding that this is a voluntary program, not a required program, separate from, it may, however, help in getting some of those other grant dollars. So in that case, I don't have a problem with this because the economic impact is up to them. It's not a requirement, and that's the key to this, as far as I understand economic impact. Thank you.
Yes, you are absolutely correct and more eloquent in stating that than I have been. So thank you. April, I see your hand up next.
Thank you. And so I haven't said anything during this meeting, and mostly because I was not able to participate in the first meeting, was inadvertently left off. So I'm just catching up and have really appreciated the discussion today, and just also want to say that I appreciate the work of staff in putting together the revised rule draft and going through those changes. It made it easy for me to look through. I am still digesting and thinking about a few components, but I think in this regard, I do agree with Peggy's statement as far as this being a voluntary thing that someone takes on, but I do think that once you take it on, it becomes a requirement. And so local governments, irrigation districts are types of members. There would be some additional cost of compliance and reporting. However, I don't think that is undue. And as Peggy said, it is something that you would choose to take on as an entity. I do think, and I know that this is intended to be our last RAC meeting, but thinking about sort of the evolution of where we're at today and maybe how we got there. A number of folks that are on this were on the regional planning work group that in some ways led to this concept, as well as the place-based planning bill and then the subsequent RAC that a number of us are all on there. And so trying to think about, well, how does this all fit together? And I think there's a number of questions that are still remaining. And I don't think, even if we were to schedule more RAC meetings, that we're necessarily going to resolve all those questions. But I guess that's a long way of me saying that we should acknowledge that there are additional questions out there to address. And I'm not saying that those need to go in the rules. I think that's more of just how some of these things get presented, and particularly once they roll out. I'll do my part in sharing with our members these rules, and we'll comment through the various processes. But I think really the true test is going to be when it starts to roll out, along with the place-based planning funds, and it's going to work a little bit differently depending on what type of funding source the entity is potentially eligible for that would have these guidelines, but also how that gets used, whether it's a planning, whether it's feasibility, whether it's implementation, or some things in between. And I hope that we can work to find the positive aspects of that, because to me, that there are a lot of questions. There are going to be some concerns from our members, but I'm choosing to be optimistic in that this is really a missing piece, along with the place-based planning fund, to really start the conversations about water projects early on and hopefully develop broad community engagement and support so that we don't have some of the negative outcomes that folks have alluded to as being possible. But I do think that I don't want to encumber it in rules, but there's going to be a need to more than likely come back to these rules, make some adjustments and improvements as we learn once it starts to actually go out on the ground, if that makes sense. So thank you.
It does. Thank you so much for that. Michael.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. So my comments are kind of in a similar vein as April's, and certainly respect the point that Peggy made about it being voluntary, and I just understand that. But I think to those questions, what would you expect additional reporting is really, I represent the League of Oregon Cities and all our 241 members, and we've done some surveys, and 1/3 of our cities are really just facing budgetary challenges, and that is going to continue to grow. So, and I think it's worth stating too, I think the principles of community engagement are great. Like that should be important, sort of in any project, right? I was at a brownfields conference earlier this year, and there's kind of considered a gold standard of community engagement around those processes. So I think it's good, but I just think it's really important to sort of underscore some of those financial challenges that our members have. So if there is not an incentive around it, or if there isn't funding in a program, then it's going to be really challenging to sort of really try to achieve those goals. So thank you. And I too have appreciated everybody's comments. It's a great discussion. Thanks.
Thank you for that. And Peggy, I see your hand has gone back up.
It has, as I'm reviewing things and cogitating. And this may get me into big trouble, but it says that the rules are to increase the meaningful involvement of disproportionately impacted communities. But somewhere in here, there ought to be some statement about and all Oregonians. The emphasis, obviously, we are trying to improve what has been a poor set of public engagement around disinfected communities disproportionately. And I get that, but I don't want to lose I don't want to lose that everybody gets to be involved. So I don't know how to say that, whether you add and all Oregonians to on page 2, the 2 paragraphs about it. But I'm just trying to figure out how in our attempt to be fair and make sure that people who haven't had a voice have a voice, the people who have had a voice also get to continue to have a voice. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I see Kim's hand up, so.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Peggy. And I think we can look and see how we can move towards that and promote that while also recognizing what authority the statute granted us and that it did not say all Oregonians. So, right, it's finding that balance of pushing and moving on while recognizing we will do what we have the authority to do. And so it might not end up in the rules because we don't have the authority, but then there's other pieces through the programs where we can be like, well, this is not technically sufficient because you're excluding a group that should be included.
So we'll look forward to all this wonderful guidance you guys are all going to be able to do as well.
We have a lot of stuff. I'm looking forward to getting folks feedback on that because this is all a journey that we're taking together to improve how we manage water.
It is, absolutely. And I do want to pause. I feel that our conversation has kind of gone also kind of bouncing between economic and racial equity, and I think that's been great. I want to give space for us to kind of move into if there's more racial equity comments that we want to, or if we feel that we're kind of at a consensus or at least a pausing point for kind of our RAC's comments and feedbacks on the racial, economic, and fiscal impact statements, because I do want to provide time for members of the public also. As a reminder, if you're interested in providing public comment, please make sure you drop a note in the chat so I can ensure that we have plenty of time for anyone that would like to provide it. Okay, so I do see quite a bit of comments in the chat. So if you have the capability, I would recommend that you take a look at those. I do not see any specific comments that are on the racial, economic, or fiscal impact statements. I have definitely taken notes on what everyone has been saying, and thank you for that feedback for sure. I think with that, let's pause for another second to see if there's any members of the public interested, and then we can go into next steps for the RAC and kind of potentially wrap up a little bit earlier since I am eating into your lunches. All right, hearing no interest from or any comments about public comment, let's go into next steps, I think, for the RAC. So today was the second of 2 RACs that we held together. I want to thank you all for your thoughts and your comments on not only the rules as they are drafted, then also the economic, racial, and equity statements. So we have received quite a bit of comment. We will be actively thinking about that and also incorporating that to the best of our ability into not only the rules, but also into the economic impact statement. We are not planning on holding another RAC for this process. Our goal is to take that information, incorporate it into an updated set of rules to reflect the feedback that we received today. And we will be sending just an updated version of the rules to the RAC so that you are aware of how we've incorporated your feedback and just to archive that in addition to a set of meeting minutes. Our goal is to have that up to you within the next several weeks. And it is the department's intent to start an open public comment period on these rules. And I'm looking at my rules coordinator, Margot. I believe we were going to open that December 1st. Is that correct?
Yes, notice is anticipated to be published December 1st, and public comment is anticipated to be December 1st through January 15th to accommodate the holidays. And that notice will also include a hearing date as well.
So with that, we do have some time, so I'm happy to kind of pause again if there's any other thoughts or closing remarks from the RAC members that you would like to provide. Oh, I see Peggy's hand go up very fast. Thank
I'm
you.
quick. I work on Jeopardy. What can I tell you? I just want to say thank you to Michael Martin for his comment about the fiscal concerns in local governments. We have got to address that if we're going to do any of these things, including all of the water needs that they have. So just wanted to put that out there.
Great, thank you. Any other thoughts or closing comments before I just do some logistics at the end? All right, hearing none. Once again, thank you so much. Today's meeting is obviously recorded. We will be posting that online. Margot's also been actively doing our meeting minutes. So those will be typed up from this meeting and sent to you as well. The chat also will be pulled down and archived so that it is part of our meeting archives, just so that all the information that was presented in that is kept and archived for that. I do want to, as we have our RAC members still on today's call, you did receive meeting minutes from the last meeting. Please make sure that if you have the time and interest to review those and make sure that all of your thoughts and your statements are archived correctly onto that. We will be posting the past meeting minutes within the next week on our website as well. We just wanted to give you all some time to make sure that we reviewed those before those were posted. But with that, I just want to thank all of you for your continued extremely thoughtful and very, very meaningful conversations at this process. This has been a nuanced process, to say the least, not only with the statute, but also with us applying these within rule. So as I said, WRD will be entering our public comments period in December. And there are many other agency partners that are on today's call as well. And many of those will be starting their processes with their specific rulemaking processes and also with their programs in the coming months. And we did provide you an additional document kind of helping summarize that and to hopefully help piece together how all of the different agencies will continue to work together. I do want to at this point also highlight that the original statute does say approximately every 5 years, the agencies will continue to coordinate on these best practices. I think many of you touched on this. This is going to be a learning process for all of us. So we are looking forward to continuing to learn and adapt and updating our guidance to make sure that we are as meaningful as possible as agencies, and also to ensure that the goals that we all are here today are really implemented the best that we can. And as these different pieces come together, that we learn and we adapt together. So with that, I cannot believe that we are actually ending 10 minutes early, but thank you so much for your time. I'm going to stick on just for a little bit longer, just since we posted till 12:30, but thank you again. And thank you all for being here.